Historically, the sidearm was a service pistol issued to an officer or senior NCO as both a sign of his authority and as a backup weapon in combat. It basically replaced the sword that was carried in earlier times. During World War II, all of the major Allied and Axis powers used official sidearms, many dating from before World War I, while others were much more modern. They consisted of two main types, either revolvers or semi-automatic pistols. A clear distinction needs to be made between official sidearms and other pistols that were encountered on the battlefields in World War II. In many armies, officers either were required or could purchase their own weapons, making for many variations of sidearm, but nonetheless there was always a standard sidearm or preferred to be used by officers according to each nation's military regulations. Poland was the first nation attacked in September 1939, and its official sidearm was one of the most modern, the Beretta M1934. Clearly inspired by the famous Colt M1911, this 9x19mm caliber single-action semi-automatic entered production in 1935 and became the standard Polish Army handgun in 1936. Using an 8-round box magazine, the Beretta was accurate, stable, and reliable, making it one of the period's best handguns. Following Poland's occupation by Germany, the Germans restarted production as the P35P, the small p at the end for Polnisch or Polish, and issued up to 380,000 to German paratroopers and Feldgendarmerie military police units. Underground production of the Beretta continued in Poland, and hundreds were secretly built for use in the 1944 Warsaw Uprising. In 1945, production ended when Poland's new communist authorities ordered the Soviet TT-33 to be adopted in its place. However, in 1997, Polish production of the Beretta restarted. During the Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union, the Finns used the Lahti L-35 as their standard sidearm. Produced from 1935 onwards to replace Russian Nagant M1895 revolvers or Spanish Ruby pistols, as well as Weimar Republic-era Mauser Lugers, the Lahti was specifically designed for extreme cold weather conditions in Finland. It fired 8 9x19mm parabellum rounds, and the firing mechanism is quite similar to the Bergmann-Bayard pistol that will be encountered later with the Danes. Though the Lahti has also a superficial similarity to the Luger. A high-quality weapon, it performed extremely well in the snow and ice and was also licensed by neighbouring Sweden as the Husqvarna M40. The Finns built 5,000 before and just after the Winter War, and then continued production after the Continuation War, with production eventually halting in 1951 for a total of 19,000 or so made. The Swedes kept their licensed version in service until the 1980s. For the Soviet Union, the Tokarev TT-30 and the much more numerous TT-33 were the official military sidearms of World War II, though they served alongside millions of Nagant revolvers. The TT-30 entered Red Army service in 1930 with some 93,000 produced when production was changed to the TT-33 in 1936. The TT pistols are very similar to John Browning's FN Model 1903 semi-auto, and internally use Browning's short recoil tilting barrel system from the M1911. But the TT-33 is much simpler and cheaper than the US guns to produce. The TT-33 was chambered in the 7.62 by 25mm Tokarev round, itself based on the German Mauser 7.63 by 25mm cartridge used in the famous C96 pistol. World War II magazine capacity of the TT was 8 rounds. The Soviets ceased production in 1953, moving to the Makarov pistol. Over 1.3 million TTs were manufactured. The official German World War II sidearm is often mistakenly believed to have been the Luger pistol, but in fact the expensive Luger was replaced as official sidearm by the Walther P38 by World War II, though of course millions of Lugers did end up serving in the conflict. The Luger was in fact still in production until 1942. while the P38 had entered Wehrmacht service in 1939. A cutting-edge design, the P38 has influenced many modern pistols. An 8-shot weapon using the 9x19mm parabellum round, it remained in manufacture until 1945, and then reappeared in post-war West Germany, slightly modified in 1957 as the Walther P.1, manufacturing continuing until 2000. Some 1 million P38s or variants have been made, and it remains in police and military service worldwide in 2023. The German assault on Norway and Denmark in 1940 saw another Colt 1911 clone see extensive service, the Norwegian Kongsberg Colt. A license-built 1911 that replaced Norway's Russian Nagant revolvers, the Kongsberg fired 7 rounds of 45 ACP from a standard capacity magazine and entered Norwegian service in 1915. Some 32,874 would be built, including under German occupation. Due to the Kongsberg's relative rarity and value, many fakes proliferate today. Denmark used the M1910 Bergmann-Bayard pistol as standard combat sidearm. A German design made under license in Belgium, the M1910 and 1910/21 models were used by Denmark, who fielded only 7,100 of these 9mm weapons. They used a 6 or 10-round removable box magazine and were replaced in Danish service in 1946 by the Browning High Power. When Germany attacked France, Belgium, and the Netherlands in 1940, 2 of these nations were using Browning High Powers or licensed versions. Entering service in 1935, the High Power was based on a design by John Browning and manufactured in Belgium at Fabrique Nationale or FN. One feature was its much larger magazine capacity, 13 9mm rounds as opposed to the 7 or 8 of most contemporary semi-automatics. The Germans used captured Belgian and Dutch high powers extensively and continued manufacture at FN. France used a very modern semi-automatic as its army's official sidearm, the Pistole Automatique Model 1935A, chambered for the 7.65mm long cartridge. It entered French service in 1937, developed by Swiss engineer and former French Foreign Legion officer Charles Peter. Similar to the Colt M1911, it won a French competition for a new military sidearm. However, by the time the Germans invaded, only some 10,700 had been manufactured. Most French officers used earlier revolvers or semi-automatic pistols. The Germans continued production of the M1935A, making a further 23,850, and following France's liberation in 1944, a further 50,400 were manufactured for the new French army up to 1950. The SIG Sauer P210 was later developed from this French pistol. Quite a number of 1935As also ended up in the hands of the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War. The regular British forces carried the Enfield No. 2 revolver, eschewing the European trend for semi-automatics. A top-break 6-round weapon, using the .38 cartridge, it entered British service in 1938 to replace the venerable old Webley Mark VI 455 revolvers of World War I vintage, the latter firearm nonetheless seeing extensive World War II service in the Indian Army and other colonial armies and police forces around the world. Several variants of the Enfield No. 2 were used in World War II, most specifically a single and double-action version, and the later double-action only version. The British were so wedded to double-action revolvers that the Enfield 38 didn't completely leave UK service until 1969 and the adoption of the Browning High Power. It should also be noted that Canadian, Australian, New Zealand and South African forces were generally armed as their British comrades, the revolver remaining their official sidearm till well after World War II. The Italians are rightly as proud and famous as the Germans for the production of fine quality and excellent firearms, no company more so than Beretta. The World War II Italian service pistol was the Beretta M1934, a smallish semi-auto chambered in 9mm Corto or 380 ACP. Magazine capacity was 7 plus 1 in the chamber, and this weapon was purposefully designed for the Royal Italian Army entering service in 1937. The Royal Romanian Army also used the M1934 in a license-built version. A very reliable pistol, it was also very robust, and it remained in production until 1991 with over 1 million manufactured. The German and Italian invasions of Greece and Yugoslavia found their enemies there armed with the same standard service pistol. Another pistol by FN, the Model 1910, a blowback-operated semi, designed by John Browning and manufactured in Belgium. It came in a 6-round 380 ACP and a 7-round 32 ACP version. The lifespan of this weapon was impressive, being in production from 1910 until 1983. Germany's other Axis allies in Europe carried a variety of weapons. The Royal Hungarian Army's official sidearm was the venerable Frommer Stop, a long recoil rotating bolt pistol chambered in 7.65 mm. This 7-round weapon was adopted by the Hungarians in 1912 and remained in manufacture until 1945. The Bulgarians seem to have favoured the Luger as their most commonly issued sidearm, but also fielded large numbers of Star Model Bs from Spain and CZ-27s from Czechoslovakia. The official United States sidearm was, of course, the Colt M1911. In fact, the M1911 was the US standard-issue sidearm from 1911 until 1985, ironically replaced by a Beretta, the M9. A single-action, recoil-operated semi-automatic chambered in 45 ACP, magazine capacity was 7 rounds. Widely copied, as we have seen, it is one of the most famous handguns in history and has seen service in every war the US has been involved with, from World War I to the war in Afghanistan, where some US Special Forces continue to use it. It has undergone many modifications and been manufactured by many different companies, with Colt alone building over 2.7 million since 1911, and production does continue with other companies in 2023. Turning to the Far East, Japanese officers were expected to purchase their sidearms. However, patriotic fervor in the 1930s caused most to adopt Japanese handguns, primarily those produced by General Kojiro Nambu. The most commonly used Japanese service pistol of World War II was the Nambu Type 14. It entered service way back in 1904, a simplified and cheaper version of the Type A modified pistol, or Papa Nambu, itself an upgrade on the older Type A or Grandpa Nambu. The Type 14 gets a lot of bad press in the US today as unreliable, but this has largely stemmed from modern shooters using incorrect non-Nambu ammunition, leading to extractor problems, and failing to grease the cartridges and the magazine, causing feeding problems. If used properly, the Type 14 is an excellent and well-made pistol, and as reliable as any of the other pistols that I've covered in this program. Using a 7-round detachable box magazine, it fired the 8x22mm Nambu round, and some 400,000 were manufactured between 1904 and 1945. Due to its shape, the Type 14 was often nicknamed the Japanese Luger by Allied troops and was a popular trophy bringback. 2 versions exist, the original pistol with a standard trigger guard and a later version with an extended trigger guard so that soldiers wearing thick gloves on campaign in Manchuria and northern China could use the pistol. Post-war it was not manufactured, though its shape influenced the later Ruger series of pistols made in the US. When the new Japanese self-defense forces were formed in the 1950s, the standard sidearm was the Colt 1911. And last on our list is China. China never really had a standard issue service pistol due to supply problems, corruption and regional differences in its army, but one foreign weapon was prized above all others by Chinese officers and carried as a mark of status, the Mauser C96. The oldest weapon on our list, the C96, was in production in Germany between 1896 and 1937 and was produced by other companies up to the 1960s. The Chinese imported hundreds of thousands in the 1930s, fitted with shoulder stocks, which also double, of course, as the holster, to get around European arms embargoes on long rifles coming into China, and due to the weapon's high build quality and large magazine capacity, they became prized sidearms as well, called the box cannon by the Chinese. The pistol was also extensively copied in China, most famously the Mauser. They came in several different calibers and formats. The standard 7.63 by 25mm C96 using a 10-round internal magazine fed by a stripper clip, the Red 9, a 9mm version, and the most famous, the M712 Schnellfeuer, basically a small machine gun with a 10 or 20-round detachable magazine, though only effective if used with the shoulder stock, creating in effect a machine carbine. Thanks for watching, please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.